So if I go all the way back, I was born in Brooklyn, New York.
Oh,
I come from an architecture family, and I say that because like I was born in Brooklyn, New York. My parents had come back from the Peace Corps, and they were in New York. My dad's an architect, and he was working in New York after the Peace Corps, and then he went to the GSD at Harvard. So we went from New York to Boston. Then he got a job working on the rapid transit system in Hawaii. So we went from Boston to Hawaii, and then eventually landed here in Los Angeles when I was about 4 years old. And, my entire upbringing was here in Los Angeles. And I lived on the Sunset Strip in West Hollywood. I grew up between the Whiskey and the Roxy on Sunset Boulevard, and had what everyone seems to say must have been a crazy life. And it was a total normal upbringing in the middle of Hollywood.
yeah.
But
And you were saying that you come from a family of architects in a way, and your dad is and was an architect, right?
yep. And he, he was, so I grew up in an architecture family. My dad had his own practice, of which my mother ran. So it was kind of like from a very young age, I was just in this, architecture family and everything architecture. My dad's first office was on Holloway, in the Schindler Building on Holloway, right off Sunset there. And so it's kind of always around it as a kid, like I said, going from New York to the GSD, so I was kind of like through osmosis, I guess. It was really, it was just part of my, part of the fabric of our family and my life. And ironically, as a result of that, I think early on and when I was young and starting to formulate myself and interests and so on and so forth, like I was really like architect. I wanted nothing to do with it. Like I was like, get me away from it, everything, right? Like just kind of trying to establish who I was as a person and an individual, and just kind of trying to, find my own interests. And I remember just sort of like, as I was growing older, just, I was interested in sports and all kinds of things like that. And I was just, not sure what I wanted to do. And it was a trip that my parents, I took with my mom when I was 15 years old. We went to Greece, and we were in Europe, and we were in Greece, and we were in Athens and went to the Parthenon, and I had like a visceral body experience. Like I remember just sort of like losing my breath a little bit. And I don't want to say it was exactly at that moment, but it was like, I remember reflecting on that and being like, whoa, like I was really moved there. That was really cool. And then sort of putting the pieces together going, oh, okay, this is architecture. This is what they do. And sort of like started, and this was when I was 15, I was like, in high school, and I was starting to, think about, what was my future going to be, as we were starting to talk about colleges and what kind of things you want to do. And that was when I kind of put it all together, be like, oh, this is what my dad does. This is what their business is. I'm kind of interested in this. And then I applied to architecture school at that point. So yeah, it was an interesting segue. I kind of, I think it was in my blood, if you will.
Yeah.
But I definitely kind of took an interesting path that way, I guess.
Yeah. So there's a couple questions that come up, knowing that your dad is an architect. I think the first question people might have is, they might assume that you were groomed to be an architect from a young age. Here, play with Legos, draw a lot, do this or do that. Come with me to construction sites. But maybe perhaps that wasn't the case. And I was also wondering, if from the age of, 4 to 15, if you had a clear understanding of what capital A architecture was, as, an architect would understand it, because like I grew up thinking architects drew doors and windows and bathrooms, which they do that. But of course, there's a much more to it than just drawing buildings that maybe, you would see as a typical building.
Yeah, I think I had some fairly maybe a little bit of a deeper understanding, because I spent time in their office, and because I could see what things were going on. And, my dad had a drafting table at home and draw. And my dad was an incredible, and still is an incredible artist. And so he was very visual and graphic. And, it was in the middle of the 70s too, where it was like, there was a lot of this sort of graphic nature going on. And so there was, I want to say that I had like a real true understanding of what they were doing, but I knew that there was something going on. The conversations at the dining room table with, were, not always architecture related, but I kind of sensed that there was something more than just, my dad's an urban planner too. So, some of the conversations and some of the work was a little bit more urban related than it was just like he was doing houses or something like that. So there was something going on that I was aware of. But, like I said, I think at some of those early stages of my life, I was also just like, I don't want to hear it anymore. I'm tired of talking. Can we not talk about architecture? I mean, I had a great story that I remember that happened multiple times. Is like, I remember going to practice, my dad's driving me to baseball practice or whatever. And he'd be driving slowly through neighborhoods, like looking at things all around. Right. And I'm like, Dad, I got to get to practice. What are you doing? And I didn't until later in my life realize when I'm driving now through neighborhoods and cities and things like that, slowly like staring around, that I, kind of get a sense of like what he was doing and what, that his senses in the city was something really profound. And I find the same thing now. I realize, that I'm constantly observing the built and natural environment around it. It's so innate now, and I didn't realize it at the time. And to me, it was just frustrating.
Yeah, I guarantee anyone who drives behind us when we're in a new place, they don't like us because we do the same thing. But, we were remarking the other week that that's actually something that I'm very grateful for, having been in this profession, is that you're always interested in everything around you, whether it be even packaging design or new neighborhoods or houses or the natural environment, whatever, any design, you're always like looking, and there's always something to learn or to see. And, it's never boring if you have that mindset.
No, absolutely. And it's always like, I always look at things in that way too. And I look at things and saying like, thought went through into these things, right? And think it's always profound when you think about how much thought and energy, and sometimes how little thought and energy goes into things, and how important that is on many levels. So, design is, everywhere around us, and even in the design of the natural environment, right? Like there's reasons for things, and when you look at things and you can appreciate like the thought and energy and that goes into something, into making anything, it's pretty profound. And then you can kind of take that and into the education process that we went through as architects, and then into practice and so on. And I'm always continually impressed, and my eyes are wide open. And for me now, that I'm raising a family. I have two daughters that are 17 and 14, and I'm doing my best to present that to them in a way that they can be engaged and look at the world in the same way.
Is your plan to turn one of them into an architect?
No, in fact, it would be the exact opposite. I think in that case, I'd be more like my mother, who was when I told them I was going to go to architecture school, my dad was like, they never pushed me in that direction at all. Like that was all my own doing. And my dad was like, oh, that's interesting. That's fun. Cool. And my mom was like, are you sure you want to do that?
Was your mom an architect or no?
No. She just ran the business. And I think that's why she was like, are you sure you want to do this?
I was going to say, she had a more objective vision of what it means to be an architect.
She's like, I know you're not asking me, but I think you're nuts.
Story. Oh, so actually one question would be, so if you at that age when you were kind of, having to decide potentially what you would do with your future, and clearly architecture was on the table, was there something else that you thought about, something else in design, or a different path altogether?
No, I mean, I think originally, the two things that I was interested in are like totally different, and both of them are different and way different in architecture. I thought at one point I wanted to be a doctor because I think I love being, I love children, and I just wanted to be, maybe a pediatrician or something like that. And then I also was thinking about being an oceanographer because I was fascinated by the ocean and things like that. So they're totally different and totally weird and nothing to do with design. And I think as I kind of thought about the next levels of education for me, I was like, I don't think I want to be like wrapped in a book. Like as I started to understand and discover architecture after that trip, and I came back and took a class in high school and started to kind of like, and I wasn't a prolific artist or anything like that. So like visualization for me, it came very natural to my dad, and it didn't come natural to me. So it wasn't like I was drawing and like I had to learn these skills and hone those visualization skills over my career. But so it was really more of just like, as I started to discover that, design and architecture and then also thinking about how I wanted to spend my time, like in the educational process, I was like, this just seems way more interesting to me than like buried in a book. I just felt like the idea of being creative, and it was just way more interesting to me.
Yeah. Right. So then you decided to do architecture, and you end up going to Tulane. Is that right? For your bachelor's and your master's, actually.
Correct.
Yeah. So when you got to architecture school, and this is a question I've asked before in this podcast, were you surprised at how architecture school like went? Because I do feel like sometimes people have an idea of, I'm going to be drawing floor plans on day one, and it's very pragmatic, I think, as opposed to conceptual.
I didn't really have any idea what I was getting into when I was going to architecture school. I don't think I really, I didn't get some prep from my dad or anything like this is what you should expect, or I just kind of, I knew it was a different discipline. And I remember, kind of sitting in the first kind of seminar with all the first year professors and, just kind of getting unloaded with all the stuff that was going to be coming your way. And, it was, my roommate was one of my best friends from college, and he was in architecture school too. So we were, kind of together in that a little bit. And so I didn't really have any expectations. I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't know what to expect from the city that I was going to. New Orleans was like, turned out to be maybe, one of the more profound pieces of that experience for me as well. Both just from an experience perspective, a cultural perspective, and then, a really incredible fabric of a city and history and roots to then be kind of in a, avant-garde school of new thinkers trying to produce, modern architecture and architecture on top of this fabric, I think made for some really, really phenomenal work. I think there's still phenomenal work coming out of that place. And so there was a lot in the experience in architecture school that was pretty profound. But it took a while for me to kind of get used to it all. Like, I came from California going to Louisiana. Like, it was like, where am I? And, so that part was challenging and interesting. And, architecture school was not like anything else that anybody that wasn't in architecture school that were my friends was doing. Like, it was so different. And it just took some time to kind of get used to it. And it, I think for me, it was an evolution. So it was, like my roommate in college and my two of my roommates were like prolific, they were like, one of them won, best overall, architectural career award, the John Lawrence Award. And the other one won best thesis. And, I'm just sort of struggling to hone my skills and stuff. So I think like the way my career, both the way I got into architecture school and then over time, it's just taken me a different path to sort of hone the skills. I didn't like start like drawing houses when I was 7 years old, and it just never stopped.
Right.
I think it was an evolution over time of to learn my love for design and architecture and the built environment.
So, that's all really interesting, especially the skill set component of that part. But so when you applied to Tulane, did you have to like submit a portfolio of some kind, like to prove that you had some kind of skill set, or was it?
No, I mean, I think the class that I took in high school, there were like 3 divisions of it. There was like model making, working drawings, and rendering. And I think I did some working drawings, like a floor plan or something for a house that I think I sent. But there wasn't really, it wasn't a portfolio you had to put together.
Right. I mean, I think it's fascinating that one would come into architecture school not having a whole bunch of skills, because I think a lot of people assume, and they're right in a certain regard, that if you come into day one of architecture education and you have a really good hand and you're really good at drawing floor plans or whatever skill sets, right, that you have a huge advantage over other people. And I found that in teaching and also being as a student, that's true only to a certain degree, but can also be the opposite, where people who have that skill set end up trying to be more advanced than what they need to be in the first few years. Because I find that first few years, it's more about breaking down preconceptions of what people think about buildings are. And it tends to be those who have really good hand, those preconceptions become more crystallized as opposed to being undone, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I would agree totally. And I think it's definitely changed. I think that, students don't have to have a hand anymore.
Yeah.
The computer becomes their hand. So they have a whole set of, and then they have to hone those tools in the same way you have to hone the pencil. But when I was in architecture school, it was all pencil, it was all ink on Mylar, it was all that. So it was, I think in some ways, I saw people that were having an easier time being able to express themselves in that medium. But that doesn't necessarily mean that their problem solving skills were any better.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I think that's what I learned in architecture school the most, and which I carry through in every aspect of my life, is the problem solving skills that we learn. And, there's all different kinds of mediums and different kinds of avenues that skill can be used in life. But in architecture, yes, you then need to use those tools. And we were learning at that time, I was learning those tools to be able to then express those specific, skills. So it took me a little bit longer to get, to get myself. I think that an interesting segue there, I think, at the end of, my thesis and at the end of my architecture career, I remember being like frustrated in that, like, we were dealing with, in some of the projects, not all of them, and some of them being big scale things or urban issues and stuff like that. And I remember just trying to understand, like, okay, what do these lines that I'm putting on paper mean? And so for me, I discovered, I took a furniture class in my 5th year, and I discovered the idea of like, oh, now I can understand, like, putting a line on paper and then holding that in my hand and the pieces like this, like, it really kind of opened my eyes. Like, oh, now I'm starting to like see this in a different way that I had never seen it before. So that was really a prolific moment for me, because then I got into furniture design. My first job out of college was with David Hertz at Synthesis, his old firm Synthesis. And the first things that I was doing, I basically ran all of the design work in the Syndicrete manufacturing portion. And then I worked on the architecture, the projects that he had. So within the first 6 months of my experience there, I was drawing shop drawings and doing, field templates for countertops in the kitchen, and then doing shop drawings. So I was like, really, like, the lines were really deliberate on the paper. And I just really, it just like all of a sudden it just like opened up for me, where I could really understand how that the lines on paper, what they meant in the field and what they meant to people in the shop that were building things, and how all of that stuff started translating really specifically and deliberately in the construction part. And I was like, oh my God. And it just like opened up all this, it kind of unlocked this stuff for me. And then I got really interested in doing furniture. And it was also at a time where I was super young and green, and it was away from that. I had this entrepreneurial fire in me that I didn't really quite know about yet. But it was like, now all of a sudden I started getting commissioned to do furniture. And it was like this place where like, oh, I'm first year out of college. Nobody's going to take a chance on me on some big project, but they'll take a chance on a coffee table or something like that. So it was like all of a sudden this way of like really kind of starting to hone my skills, both from a design perspective and then into built form really fairly quickly, which is different than architecture. And then it was also a way for me to like get into now getting commissions and now being able to be like, oh, there's this entrepreneurial thing that's going on inside of me that's also like super alive and it needs to be fed. And that was kind of like the catalyst of where it all really kind of started to materialize for me.
Wow. There's two kind of very interesting avenues with that. The first one, so you were talking about that once, obviously in architecture school, you produce drawings, right? And then, but you were saying that once you started producing drawings for furniture, for smaller things that could be touched and held and fabricated, that was really the connection. That was when the link between abstraction, aka drawing, and reality became much clearer for you.
Yes. Yeah, it was really a pivotal moment for me.
And in the sense that because the link being one of construction and fabrication, or the link being that, but also just an understanding of how abstract lines can become something tangible.
I think both, but I think at first it was the sort of the realization of the abstract. Like all of a sudden the abstract ideas that are on paper and the lines become real, and they become the reveal in the countertop, or they become the detail of the connection point between, two materials and things like that. So I think it was like the idea that these abstract ideas that then found themselves on paper then become a reality in architecture and furniture and in whatever the medium is, but they become real at some point, and those lines are also tools by which to tell someone else. I at first I was doing a lot of the fabrication myself so that I could really understand how these things went together. So I built a lot of the furniture myself. But then it was also like, then to understand that abstraction into instructions for someone else to put that stuff together. Yeah. And then it's just started to become like, then it all started to make sense. Yeah. It became a lot clearer for me.
Yeah. It's a topic that fascinates me because I think that sometimes in offices, there are a lot of young architectural designers who are working in, let's say, 2D space, and they don't really understand what they're drawing, especially when we get to like construction details and technical things. The office has standards, you kind of copy paste stuff over, and people are drawing stuff, but it's like, do you actually know what this looks like or feels like, or do you understand like the weight of this thing that you're drawing, or how complex the actual fastening or the fabrication process to producing this thing? Because I think for a lot of folks who maybe don't have field experience or maybe don't see things in 3D, it is very abstract lines, especially if we're talking about computer space.
It is. And, the fact that I remember kind of translating myself into the computer and the idea of, drawing in AutoCAD and drawing at full scale. And then the fact that you can kind of zoom in at any level, was different than like, oh, I'm bringing out my 2B pencil and I'm going to draw a very heavy line here. And then I'm going to draw light lines with H pencil. Like you were deliberate about the graphic of it because it was it was just a different way of communicating. And so, I believe me, we've put pencils down and we're fully invested and love the computer. I mean, there's so many things about that digital drawing, but I do think that there is something about, being able to understand how these things translate out into the field, because there's difference between, the field is, they're still using pencils on 2x4s and straight edges against 2x4s and cutting them with saws and things like that. And while there are lots of really interesting and awesome fabrication techniques out there, it's still pretty rudimentary. And so you still have to understand how these pieces are going together in the field. Yeah. And for me, the furniture was a great way to kind of engage in that. I soon, I thought that was the direction my entrepreneurial, that's where I started. That's where the assemblage sort of started. And I thought that was going to be kind of the path. I soon realized that the furniture market is maybe one of the more difficult markets there is.
Really?
Yeah, it's really challenging, I think. Partly because it's just the middle ground. It's like, it's either super high end or it's, IKEA, right? And the middle ground is really hard. And so it was just, I discovered that business, while we still do a lot of furniture, we do a lot of like pieces in our projects and things like that. It just, from a business perspective, I think I realized and was getting more into, doing actual architecture, that was really the direction we wanted to head.
So a couple questions with the furniture. So what was the first piece you made, and what were some of the things you've made, prior to transitioning over full-time, let's say, to architecture?
I've made, I think the first piece I ever made was a coffee table for a friend of mine's parents. And one of the materials in it was syndicrete, which was the material that David Hertz was producing at the time. Mm-hmm. So I think that was one. And then there was a whole slew of other ones that were, coffee tables and bookshelves and, whatever anybody kind of needed. So there was just a variety of different things. And then we still try and do that occasionally. I've got a couple pieces laying around here in my house that I do, things like that. So, it's still a very interesting medium. And again, I love the sort of, scale of it, for sure. But we're far along into, the architecture world, and, furniture was just a great way to get me where, it was just a part of my path that was necessary for me to get where I am,
Yeah. And that part is great, because you were describing that you started off thinking that furniture could be it, right? And you also said something which was, I think, very insightful and interesting, which was that furniture allowed you to get clients who, as you were saying, they could take a risk and say, okay, I will hire this relatively young person to do a coffee table, but I wouldn't hire them to do my entire house. But so did the furniture in that way, was it useful as a way to kind of get in with, that sounds a bit conniving, but get in with clients and then have things slowly evolve to bigger scale?
Absolutely. It was definitely, and I think it comes back to that piece of like, there was this entrepreneurial fire like that I realized early on that there was just something about like, I think it's inherent in most architects that, they want to do their own thing. And for me, it was just, I realized really early on that was something I wanted to do. So furniture is also a commodity I could sell, right? I could sell furniture, I could design. And I knew that, again, people would be open to taking a risk on furniture versus architecture. So very early on, it was a way to me to kind of make a business and make, okay, now I'm doing furniture and people are knowing me for doing furniture. And then from that, it turned into, then somebody asked me to do a little bathroom and this and that. So the project started smaller. And it was, I think it was just that it was a way for me to create a portfolio, number one, a niche in the marketplace, maybe, and just to kind of, again, fuel that entrepreneurial fire that was really definitely inside of me. It was like, I got to make a business out of this. And I'm not gonna open a studio right now because nobody an architecture studio, because again, like, I just don't have any commissions yet.
Right.
But I can make commissions out of furniture. I started to think about doing a line and how that was going to work and stuff like that. So I think it was a lot to do with my design need, like to kind of continue to fuel my design skills and my understanding of the translation of design into the built world. But it was also just like this entrepreneurial piece of me that was a way to kind of, continue to launch that forward.
Yeah, one of the things that's interesting about furniture, and I know a lot of architects have probably lightly thought about doing it as a way to make more money, is to develop a line and you design it. The idea is I design it once, it gets fabricated, it gets produced, and every time it gets sold, I get a percentage of that. So it's like passive income kind of like dream. But I suspect that getting to that point is way, way, way more difficult than people think.
Oh my God. It's why we're not in a furniture business, because I discovered pretty early on that it was really difficult. I mean, one thing I discovered about sort of the idea of a furniture line is it's not so much about the piece. It's not so much about the design of the piece or how awesome the piece is, but can that piece be disassembled? Can it be shipped? Can it be all those things? Because if it can't, then it's really going to be a few custom pieces. Because if it costs more to ship it than it does to buy it, like at a certain point, the market just minimizes to very small market. And that's why I kind of said, like, there's either the super high end custom furniture where people are like, oh yeah, I don't care what it costs. I don't care what it costs to ship. I got to have it. Or it's the IKEA pieces that fold down into a box that can fit into the back of your car and can get home to, a million people. Like I discovered that it was like, which are all really interesting design problems. Those are all super cool design problems to learn how to figure out and how to solve. I think I just discovered at that point, I was like, yeah, I mean, I think at that point, I had some furniture, I had a line we were trying to maybe think about, but I also now had some commissions and some architectural things. And I was just like, yeah, this is way more, I'm more interested in building buildings and doing architecture. And I think that's where, the path sort of, and we knew that furniture or, kitchens or bathrooms where there's sort of a furniture level of detail was a way, again, to kind of, find a way to get more commissions and just, feed the business.
Yeah, that's smart.
So then what was your first more architectural project?
So the first project that I did on my own was Pixel Liberation Front, which was a friend of mine's company, and they were basically a computer graphics company. And they did actually a pretty interesting thing. It's called pre-visualization for movies. So what they did was, like, for movies, they would digitally create a scene for directors to see prior to filming it. So This was early on. And so they got a space on Abbot Kinney, and they asked me to design it. It was a storefront, and we redid all the storefront, did all the design for the workstations and the space, and I did 2 or 3 pieces of furniture in there, like a coffee table, and this reception desk, and a conference room table. So it was sort of a segue between all of the pieces, and we built them all and built it all kind of ourselves and stuff like that. So it was a really fun project, and it was sort of the first thing that I was kind of doing on my own.
Interesting.
Very cool.
I like hearing about how different architects get into how their offices come to be. And I don't know, the narrative of being in a profession that's different, let's say furniture fabrication and design, but still very much related, and then having it bleed over into architecture, I think it intrigues me because it's a different path. Was it? And I don't know how the general public views architecture and design because we've been in it too long. But like, one might assume that if this person went to architecture school and they are doing furniture design, that maybe most people would say, okay, well, they're only good at doing furniture design. I'm not going to bother having them doing something even slightly larger, like a kitchen remodel.
Right.
Was that the case, or was it not the case? Or was it that people said, well, you have architectural background and I like you, so let's do something?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a way to create, an aesthetic base for, a portfolio and something to pitch to people. So I think that I don't think it was so much at a certain point as I got more experience and more, projects under my belt and so on and so forth. There was, it was definitely a way to kind of establish an aesthetic that people were interested in seeing and then interested in translating. And I was out hustling as best I could to get whatever I could. And then interestingly enough, so I was at David Hertz's office for 5 or 6 years right out of school. And then from there, I left for, went to another firm for about 2 months. And then I got that project I was talking about on Abbott Kinney. And then at the time, I think I was helping a buddy of mine who was working at Lorcan O'Hurley's office it was like he and Lorcan. And so I helped detail something. And then I got an opportunity to move to New York. And I was, one of my best friends from college was moving to New York, and I was like, yeah, I want to do that. So I left LA to go to New York, and I had some contacts. I ended up landing 2 projects. The plan was to go to New York, get a job, and then my buddy and I were going to figure out how to open up, an office in New York. And I ended up getting 2 projects on the way to New York, like some contacts I had. And so we kind of hit the ground running, and basically I opened our office in New York and I was there for about 3.5, 4 years, doing projects in New York.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Yeah. We had our offices were at 38th, between 8th and 9th, in Hell's Kitchen.
Oh yeah. Right in the grind.
Yeah. And it was when Hell's Kitchen was still, really Hell's Kitchen. But it was fun. It was an interesting time. We did a number of projects in New York. It was really fun and exciting. And, and then I ended up coming back. I came back to LA after about 4 years. I came back, and a friend of mine had a house that he wanted to buy, and wanted to know if I wanted to buy it and do a flip on it. And so we did that in Los Feliz. And that was at the time when I was like, now I came back to LA, and I had some projects under my belt, little projects, nothing terribly, no ground up houses yet, nothing big, nothing massive. And I came back to LA. I was working on this house with a buddy of mine. I was doing a couple of these little small projects, and I was just like, I'm burnt. I want to go get a job. Like, I just want to get a job and like, go to an office, get a job,
have health insurance,
and do all that
PTO.
stuff. Exactly. And go home at the end of the day,
right, and
put it down. Right. That's what I wanted to do. Right. And so I put my resume out. Now I had about 10 years of experience or something like that. And I start getting like response from my resume. Like, I'm getting these calls back, like, cause now I have 10 years experience. I was a little, I knew what I was doing. I wasn't so green. And I got a phone call from Lorcan, who I knew because I told you I'd been working with him previously, just when he was one person. And he goes, DT, I need somebody with your level of experience. He says, but I'm at a stage where I don't think I can afford you, but I'll hire your company, and then give me as much time as you can, and I'll kick you referrals for projects that are too small for me, and so on. And we'll see how we can make that work. So I did that for like 5 years, basically. Wow. I ran Lorcan's office, and it was really a really also very pivotal time, both just in my in development of my design aesthetic. Lorcan was pivotal in that, I was also working on some profound projects, and I ran his office. I mean, when I got there was a bunch of young people there, and I think it was the first time for Lorcan to kind of get somebody that had, again, some experience that could kind of get in there and relieve Lorcan of some of the, stuff that he was trying to do as he was growing his practice.
Right.
And I was involved in some amazing projects with him, and I was also like running Assemblage at the same time. So it was great because I got referrals. I got a couple referrals, but I was also still working with my own clients and stuff like that. And I was able to be very selective on the projects that I was working on my own because I had a job, and then I was doing this, at the same time, so I could kind of be deliberate about the projects I was taking. And so I was doing that while I was running Lorcan's office. That work went on for about 5-6 years there.
Wow.
And, again, it was also really super pivotal in my, my development as an architect. And I was exhausting. I mean, I worked, so much. It was insane. But,
so a real quick question. In New York, why didn't you stay there? Why did you decide to come back?
Well, my best friend, who's still to this day my best friend, and at the time, we partnered up. We were in New York. We were doing stuff. I think my friend loves architecture. He loves design. I think he just decided, that architecture he's my best friend. He's also, on my advisory board for Assemblage and everything. He just, like, the business of architecture just frustrated the hell out of him.
That's understandable.
And I totally appreciate it. Right? And I understand it and respect it.
Yeah.
And I think he was just like, this business is too hard. And so he had an opportunity to go in a completely different direction and decided that's what he was going to do. And so then I was in New York, and I was just like, this isn't really my home. Like, I don't, I was born there, but it wasn't my home. And I was like, do I really want to stay here? And do I really want to, I think it was more of just like, I think I want to get back home, settle myself. My buddy, one of my oldest friends growing up, called me and said, I'm looking to buy a house and flip a house. Would you be interested in doing that? So there was some kind of catalysts and reasons for me to kind of come back. Mm-hmm. I think it was come back home where my family is. So it was just, I didn't see myself settling there. I mean, if my friend had said, let's keep doing this, I may still be in New York if that had happened. But I think when I was left there sort of deciding on where I wanted to go and where I wanted my path to go, I was thinking, I want to get back to where my home is and my family is and all that. So, and that opportunity led itself. So I just found myself back here.
Was the interest always to do, have more of a focus on residential work for you, or?
I mean, I think coupled with the furniture and stuff like that, I think it was definitely that, but I've always been like, because I've been entrepreneurial, I'm after whatever comes my way. Right. And, I kind of use the analogy of like, surfing in that way. Like, you're out paddling out in the water, and you may be in a place where there are multiple breaks, and you're like, oh, I'm going to paddle over here because I see a wave starting, or I'm going to paddle over here because there's a wave starting. It's kind of like that. I feel like, as being entrepreneurial, I kind of had to, I couldn't really direct what I wanted to do. I could say, residential architecture interests me. So furniture, again, was that sort of way to maybe get closer to that. But also, my first project was that commercial space on Abbot Kinney. So it was really more of just like what comes to me. And my philosophy now is like, I always want to do residential. I love residential work. I think it's just such a great building type for so many reasons. I love the connection with the people and all that, but we're interested in doing whatever comes our way. And we're interested more in people that want good architecture for whatever it is they want, right? Whatever problem they come for us to solve. architecturally. We just want them to be like, we believe that, good architecture makes whatever that space is better.
Yeah. So, it's great. Oh, there's a good video clip right there. Boom. So also, could you give us a sense of like timeline? You mentioned that when you came back to California, you had been practicing for about 10 years or so. So you're like 30-ish or something?
Yeah. So I'm 53 now. So I was in New York right around the millennium. So I was 20 years ago. So I was about 30. Yeah. Somewhere in that range.
Gotcha. And for people listening, Lorcan or Hurley, LOHA, as they're known, is a really big time office in Southern California. Like maybe, I don't know how well known they are outside of like United States per se, but like anyone in California, Southern California, if you think of it's central offices rather, that would probably be one of them. But so when you were there, like how big was the office at that time, their office at that time, and why didn't you decide to say you wanted to do your own thing? I mean, that was.
Yeah. I mean, when I stepped foot in the door there, I was already well along in doing my own thing. So I knew that was my path. But when I stepped in there, it was, I think there was like 3 people or something like that.
Wow.
I think he's over 20 now. Well over that.
Yeah.
So there was like 3 people.
Okay.
And so it was, I was really connected to Lorcan. Like he and I were really tight and worked on some really awesome projects. And, I knew, again, this entrepreneurial piece of me that was just like needed to be fed was there. And so it was part of why it worked for me. Like in hindsight, at the time when I was looking, sending my resume out and looking for work, if I had gone to an office and just, taken a job and maybe tried to do things on my own, sort of without anybody knowing, I don't know how long that really would have worked for me, like in hindsight, as I look back on it. So the situation that Lorcan presented to me ended up working really well because it kept that piece alive for me, which I think in hindsight was like really important for me. And so I reached a point, I had been there for a while. I'd worked on some really amazing projects and I loved being there. And I loved being in the position I was with Lorcan, and I still look back on it fondly and back on it as being like a very, very prolific component in my career and experience. But it was time, and I ended up having I got married and had a kid, and we bought a piece of property and a house, and we were gonna remodel it and we started on that project, and it was just time. I was like, now it's time. I got this project. I got to focus on that. And it's really time for me to like put my head down. And, if this is really what I want to do and assemblage is really, in my future, then I really got to put my head down and do it, sole focus. Mm-hmm. So, we built, if you've seen the Ridgewood residence on our website, that was the project that my wife and I embarked on at that time. And it was just like, there was so much energy in that. And it was just, it was time to put my head down.
So how did the logistic work with Lorcan? Because if you were running Assemblage while, I guess, help him with his practice, was there always a very clear line as to where was Assemblage existing and what was Assemblage doing versus what his thing was? Like, how could you make sure you were fulfilling your own, agenda or the things that you wanted to achieve while helping him out?
You just don't sleep.
It's a very blurry line.
David, you hit the nail on the head. Number one, I worked, the number of hours I put in a day was just insane. But, at that time, and as I said before, the work that I was doing for Assemblage was, I didn't have like 15 projects that I was trying to manage. I had a couple of projects I was trying to manage, and I was able to be very deliberate about those projects and focus on projects that were interesting to me and exciting. I ended up having somebody working on the side for me, outside of the office, and working and kind of doing drawings for me while, during the day. And I was working at night and stuff like that. I mean, my focus at the time was running Larkin's office. I take, it was known, I would take calls during the day or do what I had to do. And if I had to do something, it wasn't a mystery. It wasn't some like, oh, I got a doctor's appointment. It was known, and it was known, we didn't publicly talk about it in the office. Like, I tried to, when I was at Larkin's office, it was Larkin's, I focused on Larkin and Larkin's work, and the work was, was demanding, but it wasn't a secret, and it wasn't something that, it was the setup that we had. And so, I worked a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great partnership though to have. I mean, it's tough starting your own practice, and we talk about this on the podcast fairly often. And one way that people do it, because I think I see others doing it, albeit not successfully, and they think it's the path, is that they teach part-time and then they have an office. But the problem is you get paid nothing teaching, and there's no synergy between the two. I mean, there's creative synergy, right? But there's zero professional synergy between the two. You don't gain anything professionally by teaching, realistically, So when did the name Assemblage come about? I mean, it seems quite obvious in a sense, given the furniture background, all that stuff, but like, when did it occur to you that this would be the name?
I don't remember the date. But it was early on. I remember it was my friend that was my partner in New York. It was my best friend. He had come out. We were in LA. He had come out to visit me in LA, and we were like, I had a project, and we were kind of shredding on it and messing around, and we was like, 11:30 at night, probably a couple cocktails in, and doing some sketching and whatever. And we've kind of stopped and said, we can't do any more work. We can't do any more design work until we have a name. We have to have some kind of name. This isn't going to work. And so then, I think maybe a couple more cocktails later, we're like just shredding on names, and just, we were talking a lot about, the assembling at the time of furniture pieces and materials and things like that. And, so, that was a component of it. And then, the edge, to just kind of be on the edge of contemporary discourse, doing something that's edgy and exciting and prolific. So I don't remember exactly the sort of, at what number cocktail it landed on. It was definitely that thing that we could not put another line on paper and sketch anything until we had a name. And so it was like, now we were determined.
That's funny.
And it came up, and it worked.
I think that's also that to have as a goal, I think, is funny, but it's also, I think, probably tied to one thinking of themselves as an entrepreneur and having that mindset. Otherwise, I think if you didn't have the entrepreneurial energy, you'd probably just keep designing and be like, I don't need a name. I'll just keep going and going and going, which is not a good idea.
Right. Yeah. I think the other thing that's important about the name is that, I could have just said it was, put my name on it. Yeah. But that's never been, I'm very collaborative. And so, I also realize that in every aspect of this business, you need to connect with people. And so, it was very deliberate that the firm not be my name, because I want other people to be a part of this. And so, like, it's a collective, and I can't do the work we do without the amazing people that we have doing everything in my office, from every aspect that makes a business run. And I need that on the job site. I can't build a house or a building without a contractor that's got a team of people.
Yeah.
And so, that part is really important to me. So it was always important that this isn't about me. It's about a collective whole that work together to get to the desire, whatever the desired outcome is. And so that was also a really important piece. And even that session of discovering the name was that too, right? Where we were like talking about that, of just being like, yeah, this is collaborative. Like he and I together in this design charrette was what was making that project come together, that collaboration. So that was, it's not only the assembling of pieces and materials and things like that, it's the assembling of all of those things, city, contractors, all of those things that come together to make architecture, and then doing it with, on the edge of contemporary discourse and something really exciting. That's where the name came from, and very deliberate.
Interesting. And it's funny when you mention all of those things, it reminds me that that's why it's exciting, but that's also why it's so difficult to produce good architecture. And you need someone who is going to be, like really, really dedicated to get through all of that, because things don't always go smoothly. I mean, they never go smoothly. Let's be clear.
They never go smoothly.
Yeah.
They never go smoothly. It's a really challenging business. I don't know that I would know how to do anything else. Mm-hmm. And I love it deeply. But it's very challenging, and from a business perspective, and it's very, very challenging, and inherently it's, and that's why it requires so many different hands in it. And, if you think about, the vision that we create, you can't execute that vision without somebody very talented in the field, in every aspect, from the guys that are digging the trenches, to put the pipes, to the craftsman putting in, the cabinetry or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of hands that go into it. It's a very difficult process, very long process. And so it requires good people. And so I've been very fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of really great people over my career. And we have a lot of really talented people. And I'm very, humbled and respectful of all the great talent that puts itself into the work that we do.
I think good people attract good people, but I do feel like that is it's not a shortcut or a hack, but that's a very essential thing to do if you want to have a practice, is you need to find good people. And not just like your own employees, but like the subcontractors, the contractors, the fabricators, like everybody, they have to be good. If you have that, like the difference between having that and not having it is, your life would be 3 to 5 times less stressful, and things will turn out better if you have the right team. If you don't, it's 3 to 5 times worse.
And when you have all that, and you have those people, then it becomes fun.
Yeah.
Then it's really exciting.
Yeah.
And the process can be really fun. From the first pencil to paper to, the last nail in the building or whatever, it can be really fun. And then you can start to look at it as being something that's when it becomes really exciting, and you can understand the sort of prolific nature of building, and how incredible it is that we can create something out of nothing.
Yeah.
And how awesome that is. And so if you can, because no matter if you have the good people or you don't have the good people, the process is riddled with challenges everywhere you go, right? It's like, it's always trying to knock you off your game. And so so much of it, and I tell my clients this all the time, is so much of our job for our clients is helping them to manage their expectations, right? And not to try to sugarcoat like, oh, this is going to be easy and cheap and all this stuff. It's trying to like manage that, because the process is riddled with everything that's going to trying to knock it off its process, which is so helping to navigate that, and having good people and being able to be communicative and work through those processes is then if you can do that, then again, it can make the process fun, even as it's riddled with the challenges that it has.
Yeah. And then your energy goes towards solving those things or thinking of new things or whatever else, instead of, more or less solving internal problems, which is kind of a waste of energy.
Right. And then at the end of the day, like, our life's too short. I want to enjoy the day. I want to enjoy the time that I'm doing, the processes that I'm doing daily, and with the people I'm doing it with. I mean, that's, as important as the architecture is and the design and the end product of all that we do, I want to enjoy the journey. Life's too short. And so that's a really important component. Part of the well-being of this is like also like making a place. And I'm very proud about the studio that we have, is making it a place where like we can enjoy our time together and enjoy the process and create really great architecture along the way.
How big is the studio now?
We're 12 right now.
Okay.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's a good size.
It's a good size. It's a manageable size. We were at 17 before COVID, which was good size too. It's interesting. I mean, I think like I said, I don't have any real visions of what size I'd want to get to or what I'm aspiring to. I think we will grow to whatever, capacity is required for the work. Like I said, we'll see where the work takes us. But we'll grow, but I don't have aspirations to have a super big firm. Like I think at a certain point, if I lose touch with everybody, I don't know how much I would enjoy that, but we'll see.
Yeah, it's a different thing for sure. Have you ever considered, since you got your hands dirty on making furniture, have you ever considered making the practice a design build?
All the time. We think about that all the time. And in fact, the house that I'm sitting in and the house that the Laurel Hills residence, we built ourselves.
Right.
So we have dabbled with it in a few various projects throughout my career. The interesting thing about it is like, I loved building this house, and there was one of my longest team members who's been with me for over 10 years, basically just kind of lived on site here, and he was instrumental in making it happen. We learned a lot. There was, a lot of ups and downs. It was fun. We architects, sure most of us think, oh yeah, we can do this. We know more than the contractors or whatever. That can be a real dangerous place. Right there. And yes, I think in some regards, listen, I'm living proof that we can figure it out. We can problem solve our way into building this house and doing it really well and successfully. What I kind of learned, and I would still entertain that idea. I like it, but it's another entity. It's another animal, right? You need to build a whole nother arm of the business that's different than the architecture part of it. And what I am definitely certain of is that once you create that arm, like let's say we decided to open up a construction arm of the business. In order to do it successfully, in my mind, you got to keep that machine running, right? You got to keep that entity continuing to build. And if you don't have the projects to feed it, then do you have to then go find some other projects to keep that animal running? And I know very clearly I don't have any desire to build other architects' work. I only want to build my own work. So at some point I could easily see getting, if you can't feed that animal, then all of a sudden the great superintendent or the great, people that you've assembled, they've got to go do something and you lose them. And I think the best way to be successful is continuity with that. And so I see that as being a roadblock and it's a different liability altogether. So I'm certain we'll do it again. But I don't know. I think and to answer your question of whether or not that would be a business or that we would want to do, we talk about it all the time. We have talked about it all the time. It's the reason why we built this. But I think going through this, I learned too that like the real way to do it is you really just gotta like put your head down and say, that is what I'm doing. And then assemble the team and then continue to feed that animal.
Yeah, design build is something that's been talked about more and more these days, and for sure more and more on this podcast. There are some architects who have design build offices, and they feel very strongly that is, obviously if you have an interest to do it, more than an interest, a passion to do it, that's the thing to do, and actually can be very lucrative, much more lucrative, generally speaking, than the average architecture office. But
Yes.
The same thing as with most endeavors. It's not nearly as simple as people think. And we know a few design build offices, very well known ones. And you're right. Like their build side, their contractor side, they have to do work for other offices. I mean, work that's designed by someone else, because they need to keep moving forward. They can't just sit and do nothing for a year or 6 months or whatever it might be. And
that's right.
And I don't. And you were saying you see it as a roadblock, and I that makes a lot of sense. And I don't really know what.
Well, it's for me. It's a roadblock. It's just that's not where my. I mean, I think it's an incredible revenue stream, and I think I would love to do that, but that just doesn't interest me. It interests me to build my own work. And if I knew that I could line up, 25 projects for the next, whatever number of years, then it would interest me. But I don't know that I can do that. So I don't know that I can sustain it. So, who knows? I mean, maybe 2 or 3 years from now that will change, and the opportunity will present itself differently. But that's kind of what I saw as being like, that doesn't seem like something I'm interested in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for sure, it's not like you want to embark on this whole new thing, knowing that you can only promise that it'll work out for the next 2 to 3 years. Like that's not, you don't want to do that.
And to be perfectly honest with you, the business of architecture is hard enough. And then becoming a contractor as well. I just think that, we're focused pretty hard right now on, taking ourselves to the next level. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we want to focus right now. And, like I said previously, I'm pretty flexible, and we'll see where the winds take us, and what comes our way, and we'll address each thing as it comes, and who knows where that's going to lead. I'm excited to see where it's going to lead, though.
So you had mentioned just now, actually, that there's plenty enough to focus on just with the architecture practice, for sure, and that you're sort of focusing on getting to the next level. What does that mean for you guys?
It's a great question. I'm in process of trying to answer that. I mean, I think obviously continuing to do great work is a passion of mine and an interest of mine. But I'm also interested in like developing this and designing this into a really successful business. And so, I'm really working hard to kind of put the right people in place to kind of help us, put people in place that can help to deliver the work at the level that we expect, but also deliver the business and to grow that into something that, I'm not going anywhere right now, but at some point, I'm gonna retire hopefully at some point in my life. And, I would love the idea of being able to kind of have assemblage be something that lasts beyond me. So it's not just like assemblage isn't alive as long as I'm the one grinding. Yeah. I'd love it to be kind of something that sort of just ended up having a life of its own and taking off. I think that would be something that's sort of aspirational for me. So I don't know really what that means yet. And I think we're starting to kind of talk about what that looks like, and trying to design our way there. I mean, I think the future holds, I'd like to think that there'll be other building types and things that we'll get into. I'm interested in that. We've got a couple multifamily projects we're looking at, so getting into that space, and I'd be interested in doing more, civic type buildings and things like that. I think, the residential work, like I said, is really awesome. I love it. I can see us doing that for the remainder of our career, but things that have a in the public realm where, more people get an opportunity to experience that, and where we can use our skills to give back to communities and things like that as well. So, those are some aspirations, and we'll see where that leads.
And your dad has now, I mean, not recently, he's been with Assemblage for since 2013, I think.
Yeah, it's been about 8 years now.
So he's part of the office, and what's interesting is that he is, from what I can tell, an urban designer and urban planner, as well as an architect. Mm-hmm. So there seems to be the capacity, certainly, to do larger projects and to think about it from, even the urban scale.
Yeah. I mean, and that was sort of the deliberate move of doing the, bringing him on. I mean, and was number one. I mean, he's like I spoke earlier, and he's been always my greatest resource for all things architecture. Right? He was whenever in school or early in my career, if I had a question, he was my first call. Mm-hmm. And so there was always the conversation of being like, oh, well, wouldn't it be great to work together? And and early in when my dad's doing urban plans and campus planning and things like that, and I'm doing furniture, it's like we couldn't be further away from each other, right? Yeah. But it was always, again, he was still always that resource that I had and utilized. And and my dad was at AC Martin for a very long time, and he was like, oh, I'm kind of done with the corporate world, and I'm going to go consult. I was like, well, why don't you just come consult at Assemblage and just, park yourself here and, and be, take go as hard or as soft as you want. Just come and park yourself here and, bring whatever consulting work you've got and, come join us and be a part of Assemblage. And it was a twist on the sort of father-son relationship, which is kind of an interesting narrative. But it was also a great thing. Like he could come in and be in a young office, be a part of, this young energy, be witness to his son being successful. And I got my dad's resource and got to be close to him and get all of his knowledge and have that there as a resource, which is invaluable. And then just from a father-son perspective, it was just a great way to kind of end out our relationship as father and son, to turn that into a different chapter. So it's been a great gift. It's been a great gift that I've been able to give and to him, and a great gift that he's given to me. And then from a work perspective, it was also like a deliberate thing to say, like, okay, come bring your urban design contacts and try and see if we can get ourselves in the door on some larger scale work and master planning that then might turn into some bigger buildings and so on and so forth. So it's been exciting. And it was also, I wanted, my dad, like I said before, I wanted him to be able to come here and work as hard or not as hard as he wanted to. I mean, he's put in a lot of years into his career, and I wanted his time ending out his career to be whatever he wanted that to be. And I never wanted him to come to Assemblage and feel like it was his responsibility now to make sure that the firm was successful. I wanted that. Right. That was my responsibility. And I wanted it to be a place where he could contribute and he could bring work, he could bring knowledge, he could bring all that, but that the firm's success and the real grind to make it work was on my shoulders.
Right. Oh, that's beautiful. I like that. Are you sometimes like, hey, get back to work?
And sometimes like, hey, do you think you're leaving at 6 tonight? This is not done.
Yeah. Sometimes I have to give him a hard time just because. But
no Christmas bonus for you this year. No, that's a really awesome. Yeah. That's really awesome story and place to be able to be in for sure. I think it's really nice.
I mean, it's been a real gift for me in so many ways. I mean. It doesn't work for everybody. I mean, I tell people I work for my father and they're like, oh my God, ever do that. And so that's a very common response, but it's worked really great for us. And like I said, it's been a beautiful gift that I've been able to give to him. And then the gift that I received from it, I just, when I round this whole experience of life out, those are the things I want to be able to look back on and just, it's a chapter that I'm going to be really proud of and it's, happy about. I'm excited that opportunity worked out for us. And it's just a beautiful narrative that I get to carry through life. So it's been great.
That's awesome. The other thing that you had mentioned kind of throughout the story today, and it was interesting, is that you have, I guess, I don't know if you'd say developed, but bought, flipped, built some of your own houses or split it with someone else. And it sounded like there maybe had been 3. I don't know if there's more. There's the one with your friend when you came back from New York. There's maybe the first house with you and your wife, and then the current one. Were there others? And can you just talk about the experience of doing that?
Yeah. So there's only one other one that we did, and that was, so I did the one with my friend. That was interesting because it was back in right around the millennium. This was right after the millennium. I came back to LA. In hindsight, I wish I had bought every house we had seen, sight unseen. Like,
yeah,
you know, I remember like looking at these houses, and it was like 170 grand, and we were like, oh, no way.
What?
And you know, yeah, I mean, it was crazy. The prices were just insane. And again, if you know, it was Nostradamus, I would have bought every single house that we could have at the time. But of course, resources were also at play, and we didn't have that. But, so yeah, that was our first little experience into that. And then my wife and I bought our house in Larchmont, and my wife comes from a real estate background. Her family's in real estate. She's a real estate broker. So part of it was a combination for us. And, you know, it's also a very deliberate move for us that we're going to utilize her skills and my skills to, you know, to make investments for us that are both for our family, but also for the real estate investment. So we did the Ridgewood house, and as we were embarking on that house, you know, we lived in that house for a couple years, and then we were looking for a place to rent while we were going to do that construction. We ended up finding a house in Silver Lake that was just about to be condemned on Silver Lake Boulevard, and it was cheap enough that we were like, let's buy it and we'll flip that and we'll live in it, and then we'll do the construction at Ridgewood. So we bought this little 900 square foot house in Silver Lake and totally redid it. And it was, you know, really tiny and just falling apart. And we did a really sweet little remodel there and lived there. And my first daughter was born in there, and we lived there. And then we embarked on the Ridgewood residence. So, and then from there, we lived at the Ridgewood house for, 12, 13 years, I think, something like that. And during that time, it was just like, we're always looking for projects. We're always looking for things to do and investments to make. We also did in the midst of that too, a multi-family project. We did a 7-unit building in Larchmont, where we were the architects and developers on. So we did that as well. Oh, wow. So it's, you know, again, probably still all part of this entrepreneurial fire. And then, you know, using my wife's skills and stuff like that. And then my wife's kind of bought into this whole world that we live in, this architectural world that we live in. And, you know, so she's our greatest patron too. I mean, she believes in it. She believes in what we do and the enhancement of property and what we get out of that. And so she's on for the ride. And so when we were at the Ridgewood house, we kind of we had our second daughter there, and, you know, it was a very small lot. It's about 5,000 square foot lot. We had about a 2,200 square foot house on it. And it was, you know, it's a beautiful house. We could have lived there for the rest of our lives. It was great. I think we were feeling a little bit like, we got 2 kids and, you know, a little bit more elbow room would be great. I think really what we were looking for was a more outdoor space. We used a lot of decks. We kind of used every inch of that property. And it was, and then in hindsight, we were looking around and we would have loved to stay in Larchmont in that area, but the HPOZ is over there. And we knew that if we were going to find something else, we were going to do another, you know, substantial remodel, or ground up or whatever. And we couldn't do that with the HPOZ. So we kind of left Larchmont, and now we're out in Ryman Canyon in Studio City, and found this property, lived in the house for a couple of years, and then tore it down. And here we are. And, you know, it's for most people, it's, you know, it's you embark on this for one reason, you know, because you want to build a house for yourself or your family. But we have three reasons. So, you know, we build it primarily, it's for my family. I built this house for my family to grow in, to be inspired by, and for us, you know, to give a shelter and an inspiring shelter to live in. And then secondarily, it's a real estate investment. So it's, you know, it's us finding ways to utilize our skills and to as a financial move. And then thirdly, it's an investment in assemblage. So my wife and I are committed to that. And it's a way for us to create, you know, the greatest business card you could ever have. And so we have three reasons for doing this. And that's been really deliberate as well over the years. And so we're utilizing that for all of us. I mean, I'm sitting here witnessing my kids living in this, understanding and seeing the experience that they're having from my eyes is similar. We remodeled my house when I was a kid. My dad did, and it was inspiring and super cool. And I remember, like, I look back on that, being inspired by that. And so I'm now looking at that, seeing my kids being inspired here. So that's great. It's a great real estate investment. And then assemblage has just been, you know, benefiting us from, and I couldn't even imagine how amazing it was going to be. And it's been great.
That's awesome. I like how clearly you see those.
Could you say that again?
Sorry.
Siri thinks you said Siri.
Siri wanted to say something, I guess.
I think it's great how clearly you see like the different kind of reasons why it's advantageous or reasons why you would do it. So the house that you're in currently, essentially that's a ground up home, right? You didn't use any of the existing structure that was there before?
There's some.
I
mean, yeah, there's some. The building behind me is the garage and guest house, and that was in that location. The bedroom, the pavilion, as we call it, we kind of took that down to about the floor studs. The building I'm sitting in now is all ground up, but I mean, for the most part, and for all intents and purposes, it's a brand new house. But there was a house here. And it was, we added on to it in multiple locations.
So, you know, before we were mentioning kind of the challenges of an architecture practice from a business standpoint, and certainly real estate tends to be more lucrative per hour than architecture in a lot of ways. So did you guys find, like, over the course of the three properties you've done together, that, you know, they get bigger and bigger because with each one you're able to sell, make a profit, and then embark on a larger project because of that? Yeah. Or is it not that direct?
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, we're kind of, you know, increasing ourselves in each move and parlaying the one off into the next for sure. So we're definitely seeing the advantages of that for sure. And here, like, one of the things that was super important to us was we wanted more outdoor space. The 5,000 square foot lot we were on in Larchmont, just, you know, while we utilized every inch of it, like I said, and tried to, you know, make that experience of being outside as much as we could, we really wanted some more land. And so coming to Studio City was the way we could find that and be able to do we wanted to do. But I mean, from a real estate perspective, definitely, you know, we've been just kind of like, you know, inching up at every stage of it. And not so much that was like, oh, we want to increase ourselves at every expanse. But I think that we were definitely trying to, like I said, I think the most deliberate thing in this latest move was getting more outdoor space, more opportunity to engage your life experience with the landscape.
Yeah, and anybody listening who doesn't know the house, you should look it up because it's really cool, and it definitely is like, you know, if you envision the indoor outdoor living, like that's the house. You guys have beautiful olive trees. You have these courtyard spaces. I mean, I think, you know, the flipping houses specifically is something that I think a lot of young architects talk about doing, and they see it as being one solution or one thing they could do to generate revenue to allow them to do other things or do more of it. But it doesn't seem to happen all that often. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's because it's more challenging than people think, or if...
I mean, it's definitely challenging, and it takes capital and it takes time and energy and it's not easy. And especially in a city like Los Angeles, like
Yeah.
like I said, when we were getting into the marketplace back in, number of years ago, the numbers were very different than they are now. So like a young architect today trying to get a starter house, you're over $1 million easily. And it's like, that's not easy.
Yeah.
Not easy. So in some senses, that goes back to your last question. I mean, we were definitely able to kind of like leverage each one of our properties into the next. So that was helpful because when we were back getting into the market early on, the numbers, it was all relative because, of the economics of the day, but still, like I said, back in the day when I did that with my friend, where we were looking at houses that were 200 grand, our first house, $500,000 which was a lot of money at the time. You can't find that today.
Yeah.
You can't find that.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy.
That part is challenging.
Yeah.
So we definitely have leveraged that from project to project for sure.
So what have you guys, so how long has this house been, how long have you been living in the current house, the Laurels?
So the Laurel Hills residence, we've been living here for now about 7 years, I think, because we lived in the house for about 2 years while it kind of fell apart around our feet. And then it took us about 2 or 3 years to build it, and then we've been living it for about 2 years. So that's about the timeline now.
Oh, nice. And I'm always curious, for architects or designers who live in their own creation, so to speak, like what things have you learned about it, and what has it been like?
Would you hire the architect again?
I would. You'd have to ask my wife. She may have a different response to that question, but I would for sure, and she would too. Yeah, we would embark on this again. What have I learned? I can in all the houses. There's nothing in all the houses that we've done personally for ourselves. There's nothing that I would do differently. What I think and I feel very fortunate that the moves that we made have been very successful, and seem to teach us a lot about, the next projects and things like that. There's always things in like materiality choices and things like that, where you're sort of learning about the way materials react and age and things like that. So there's a lot of things like that we've learned. I think that, I'm fortunate that the things that we did, the moves we made, I'm very happy with and excited about, and seem to be really successful. But some of it is also like the happy accidents, the things that no matter how much you study and understand what you're doing, there's always these beautiful things that come as a result of just now all of a sudden becoming real, right? The abstract views of the telephone pole that might be off in the corner that creates this really beautiful, abstract view in the window, or whatever it is. There's all kinds of things that sort of, come alive, and you learn when it's when it's finally alive and a real thing. But I love watching my family utilize it and experience it and the way they move through it. I just love watching the sun, move across, and the shadow patterns, and watching the way that kind of reacts. I love bringing people here and getting people to kind of have an opportunity to experience it. I think that one thing that really I enjoy a lot, and this goes to the reason why we built it and why Assemblage is benefiting from it, is because I love bringing people, like clients here. I love bringing people that they either were our prospective clients or clients we have, and bringing them here and being able to walk through this house, walk through a project of ours, without, like having to call another client first and take a few minutes to walk through their precious house. Like to be able to say, hey, I'm asking you to, I'm selling you on a lifestyle, because that's what we're doing, right? We're selling a lifestyle. We're selling an aesthetic, but we're also selling a lifestyle. And so to bring them here and show them, like open up all the doors and say, this is how I live with my family. I'm not just, selling you these ideas on paper and hoping that you're going to be the one that, we'll try it. Like
Right,
we're trying
right.
it, we're living it,
Right.
and it's in practice for my family, and it's working.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is really kind of, and I learned that when I did Ridgewood. I didn't even know that when I did the Ridgewood residence until after the fact. But then I knew that was going to come when I did Laurel Hills, and we've been utilizing that, and I still find great success and great joy in that when I can kind of have people come over, come be here for, whatever amount of time they want to be there. And there's, and they can see our family and everybody kind of living in this kind of lifestyle of living indoor, outdoor, and seeing it in practice and getting the response of that. I think that part is really fun to experience and why it's become really successful for us.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Is it difficult to design to be both, the architect and the client? Like, is it difficult to design a house for yourself?
Well,
I mean, I often joke about that. I'm like, I think I would be the worst client ever to myself because.
But I think it depends on how much pressure you're putting on it, right? I mean, yeah.
I mean, I definitely would say that. It's nice to be able to be the final, the one making the final decision. I mean, at the end of the day, as the client, it's definitely hard. The writing of the checks when you're in construction is like the continually like, when is this going to stop? Like that part's challenging. But I will say that most architects, most of us are pretty obsessive about our work, right? And about the process, and like it's often hard to kind of turn it off at the end of the day and stuff like that. And with your own house and this project, like turning it off was very challenging. Like I would go to sleep, and I experienced this when I was in doing the Ridgewood house too, like going to sleep and then dreaming about the spaces was like, and that being able to turn it off was like almost impossible. So it was very obsessive in that regard. But I will say that was an interesting aspect too, in both living in the houses on the site, which I always encourage anybody that has the means to do that. All my clients, if they have a property, if they can live on the property for a certain amount of time before they embark, you learn so much about the property and what the property sometimes tells you what it wants and what it needs, right? It informs you and informs the design process. But I will say that the experiences of both of those projects of living on the site where we were, where I was designing a project and living there, and that experience of even like that sort of dream part of like going to sleep, obsessing on the design process, and then being in the space that you're designing. Like when you close your eyes and you're like, oh, I'm in the room that I'm thinking about being here. Or whatever. I think that was a very interesting experience because you're actually on the site of the place that you're in the 3D model or whatever, and that was a very kind of interesting experience, to say the least.
It's a good point though of, you were saying being on the site because sometimes the site kind of tells you what it wants to be. And I think some of that sensation happens throughout the design process, applicable to other issues in a project, not just the site, where I feel at least sometimes that a project will, at some point, there's like you turn the corner, and it turns the corner, and it's starting to become just what it wants to be. And you're the designer, of course, you're the creator of it, but somehow you're just managing it, and you're just trying to make sure that it goes in the direction it wants to go, and you're not over authoring it or forcing it to be one way. I feel like when you force it, that's when you get into weird territory.
Oh yeah. Well, whenever for us in the design process, whenever you get to a point where you feel like you're forcing it, it's time to like put your pencils down or put your mouse away and step away and give it some breathing room, because you can't force it. It never works. And I always find that during the process of being able to kind of like relieve yourself a little bit from it. I think that's what people don't understand necessarily about, people that aren't architects don't understand the process and how it goes. It is an obsessive thing. You don't just sit down at your desk from 10:30 to 11:30 and think about the design of whatever project you're working on. It stays with you all the time. Like you're thinking about it as you're going through whatever your experiences of the day are.
Yeah.
And so it's not the kind of thing that you compartmentalize and put down. You're always processing it. And, the processes are very long. So those things are, you have to learn how to move through that process in a way where you're like, okay, I'm here. I need to answer this many questions or solve this many problems now. And I know what I can put off till later. Right. And you have to be able to navigate that. And sometimes it's partly because you can't answer all the questions at one session, right? Mm-hmm. You can never do that. I mean, the process unfolds and you're answering a certain number of questions at this stage and answering a certain number of this stage. And sometimes those questions that you answer here come back, and it's very fluid in that way. And you have to be able to kind of adapt to that. And it's a challenging process, but I think that, if you can manage it, beauty comes out of it, but it's sometimes very difficult too.
Yeah, and I suppose that's where it's also difficult to control it almost from a business standpoint, because you're right, it's not like sitting down and crunching numbers. If I sit down for an hour and I crunch numbers and put numbers into an Excel sheet, that's clearly 60 minutes of work done, very quantifiable, clean. But other times for architecture to solve technical problems, yes, but let's say design problems, it's hard to gauge that process and to control it, to make it efficient, to be able to quantify it, to make sure that you're making a profit and you're not burning time. It's an amoeba kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that part of it is very, very difficult. It's very difficult to compartmentalize that process of design into a spreadsheet of being like, well, you got 8 hours to think about this. I mean, it doesn't work in it doesn't work in, I think, the creative process in general, but mm-hmm. it doesn't really, we're certainly not taught that. I mean, we're taught to spend and exhaust whatever it takes in the name of architecture. And, and I don't like to subscribe to that at all. I mean, I don't want to compartmentalize our design process into a spreadsheet or into a number of hours, but we have to make this into a business that's sustainable, right? Because otherwise it doesn't work. So there has to be, and that's partly what I talked about earlier about like I'm trying to marry the two. I don't want to let go of doing what we need to do to make the process create the beauty that we create. But I want to make a good, solid business out of it as well. So we're trying desperately to figure out ways to do that and be more deliberate about that and be more conscious about it throughout all of our teams and things like that. But it's challenging. Mm-hmm. I don't think any other profession has that kind of rigor required in order to make it work.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And sometimes I wonder if, I think that just because I'm in this profession and I know it, and I'm sure there's other professions that feel the same way, but the sheer quantity of the number of different decisions that have to be made in a building project, even a relatively small but custom home, it's a ton,
Oh, it's never ending. It's never ending. And if you care about those things, then somebody has to think about every one of those things at some point. Yeah. And you can, it's why you want good builders. It's why architects want to be in the design build business, because they want to figure out, they know that there are going to be decisions that are going to be made later on down the road in the field, and they want to be the ones making, right? And I think that's the inherent reason why people want, because you can't make every decision the process is like this. You can't make every decision here. Yeah, we try and make it to this point. Right. And we try to make every decision before anything's in the ground, but inevitably that's almost impossible. Yeah. And so there's all these decisions that need to be made back in the back end when it's under construction. And so I think that's why, the inherent everybody wants to be in design build too, or not everybody, but because they want to make those decisions. They want to be a part of that. Otherwise, somebody else is making that decision. The contractor or whatever is making that decision at another point, and you lose some control. So.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think that certainly would be one of the payoffs, and that might be one of the first benefits that comes to most architects' mind when they're considering design build. But for sure, that's not enough. That's not enough of a reason to embark on creating a design build office. Like, do not recommend that.
No, right. And then you start realizing that, just decisions get made for lots of reasons. They're not just design related and aesthetic related. There's financial reasons. There's all kinds of things that, and that's when I look at other work out in the world and I see work that, I could critique and I could have critical eye on it, be like, oh, I wouldn't do that. But many times my first response to work that is doing something interesting is like, you have no idea what went on to make the decisions that happened in that project. Yeah. So you can be critical, but you don't know all of the intricacies that went into the decision-making, the whatever parameters that were surrounding that project that caused those decisions to be made. You don't know what happened. And so often there's so many things in those projects that make them decisions being made. So at the first time when my first critique is always like, wow, they got it done. That's awesome.
It's a miracle. It's happening.
Yeah. Because it's no short, it's such an incredible feat to get these things over the finish line. That in some ways we have to applaud that for even happening, because so often it doesn't.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with what you just said, and I think that's one of the differences. If I look back on myself, like the difference from when I was a student versus later on as practicing and having a practice, and is that when you don't have when you haven't practiced seriously, you don't have an understanding of all the factors we're talking about. It's pretty easy, and it's easy for anybody to be critical of, oh, that detail doesn't look good, or why did they do this or do that. But once you've been in it, it's like, oh yeah, there could be 6 months of conversation leading up to that thing, and then for whatever other factor, maybe it couldn't be done either other way, and it's like, yeah, so what? Like, it's one detail. We all know it probably should have been a little bit different, but they got it done. It's awesome. It's interesting. Gold stars to you. You know what I mean? Like, what do you want?
Exactly. Kudos to you getting it over the finish line.
Yeah. Well, we burned through the couple hours. The last fun question, which we ask pretty often, is: do you have a favorite building? And if so, what is it?
Oh, do I have a favorite building? I mean, I have so many favorite buildings, but I think if we stay local, we stay here in Los Angeles, I think my favorite building is the DWP building downtown. I love the simplicity about that building. I love the fact that it kind of sits on that water plane. And I love that you can, at some angles you can you get to, and you just lose the kind of interstitial glass layer, and it just looks like these slips of paper hanging out there. It's a pretty cool building. So, I could go on and on. I mean, there's so many, we're so fortunate in this town, especially just that there's so much talent. There's so many incredible buildings going on. I often talk about when the format was in it, used to be the AIA Awards. Used to be the format when you had an event and you submitted boards. Instead, it's now all digital. But when it was done in boards and they would have the presentation, you'd go into the room and their boards would all be poured up, and there'd be like 400 or 500 boards of all the submissions, and you could just look around and just see how much incredible work is going on. It was always a very inspiring thing to be in amazing company in the city with all this amazing work that's going on. So to answer your question, I think the DWP building, but I could find buildings all over the place and all over the world that are inspiring and exciting.
Have you been back to the Parthenon since you were 15 years old?
I haven't, and I would
Oh.
love to. I'd love to go back. So I think that's definitely a journey that I need to make. I'd love to take my kids there. And,
Be careful,
and,
they might end up becoming an architect.
yeah, that too. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
it's true.
Well, David, thank you so much for coming on the show and chatting with us. This was a lot of fun. I had a great time.
My God, I really had a great time. I'm so, like I said, I was honored to be a part of it. Yeah, I love what you guys are doing, and I loved that included in this great company with all these people that you're talking to. So thanks for including me.
If you're watching this on YouTube, thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the show by hitting that subscribe button and like this episode and leave comments and whatever else you do on YouTube. You can also find us on iTunes and Spotify if you don't feel like looking at our faces. Right?
In your face.
Yeah.
When I look at my face, you could stay on YouTube.
So thanks for listening or watching, and we'll talk to you again next week.